This KFAN podcast is sponsored by Builders and Remodelers, exclusive Twin Cities provider of Elements Windows. Get the highest quality windows at unmatchable value. Visit buildersandremodelers.com for more details.
Federal and state murder charges revealed against Vance Belter earlier today. Paul Blume has been a number of different locations over the course of the weekend reporting on this story, as he does so well. Pretty much every story that many stories that we've involved him in, because we like having him on. He likes giving us the very latest, and Blume is kind enough to join us now via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline. Tell me where you have been, what your schedule has been today, and just, I guess, maybe an overview of where this story stands.
Yeah, it's crazy to think this earth-shattering, story has basically just unfolded over a single weekend.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's now, taken a turn Monday into the work week, but everything in the 48 hours of the weekend is kind of where this all went down. Started my weekend Saturday morning outside the home of the Speaker Emerita Hortman, and then the house, the tragedy that unfolded there. Chased the manhunt, Sibley County, and then kind of was courthouse based today. The latest is Vance Belter, now charged in both jurisdictions federally with murder, stalking, gun possession charges that could potentially lead to the death penalty if the Department of Justice wants to seek that type of punishment. In state court across the street, he's facing second-degree murder and attempted murder charges for the shootings, with the promise from the county attorney that they will seek a first-degree murder indictment that would come with a life sentence and no possibility of parole if there were a conviction. The feds are going to take the lead. That was sort of the headline in the courthouses today. The feds will go first. We'll see what they want to do. He made a brief court appearance in St. Paul. He didn't say anything over there, but he's facing his federal charges. And now, some people were wondering, would he be taken alive? Would he be found alive? And in that moment, in the fields of Sibley County, he made a decision, because he was armed, that he was going to go peacefully into custody. So now this unprecedented case is going to unfold here.
I have to admit, just speaking off the cuff with friends and so forth, with the amount, given the interest and manpower and intensity of the investigation and the pursuit, I was very quickly coming to the conclusion that, based even on that text I think he sent his good friend of like 40 years, I guess he had rented a room for quite some time, that I might not be alive, that this was going to be the classic case of a person who does horrific damage and then turns the gun on himself, and it was going to make it doubly difficult to find him for all the obvious reasons once that took place. I guess what we learned from this case, again, Paul, no matter how much how many people you have investigating, how many outfits, it ain't going to happen all the time in 15 minutes to find the perpetrator.
No, it is not. And then, to be honest, I thought authorities were, sort of pat themselves on the back that they brought it to a close in the 3 hours that it did take. Interestingly, there are different scenarios that could have played out. I kind of, I get asked a lot as a reporter on a story like, how does this end? What do you think's going to happen? Whether it's an election, something else going on. I never even want to think about that, because, life has all these twists and turns. I don't want to be surprised by anything, but he was found. The question why given that he got away from the scene, he returned to a property of his, was eventually arrested within a mile of his home. So it wasn't like this effort to evade, to get as far away as possible, to disappear. So I don't know what was going through his mind, obviously. But based on cell phones, some significant technology use, drones, state patrol helicopter, they zeroed in on this location around his farmstead or property down in Sibley County, Green Isle, and 9:00 last night or so. Again, he had a choice. 20 plus SWAT teams were down there, 100 plus law enforcement, and he surrendered.
A couple items that you may or may not know about that I had not heard of until today. I wanted to get your reaction to, or if you can fill in any gaps. This is out of this particular piece, StarTribune.com. After the murders, video footage allegedly shows Belter returning to a North Minneapolis house. A witness said he met Belter at a bus stop at 7 a.m. Saturday at the intersection of 48th Avenue North and Lyndale Avenue, less than a mile to the east of Belter's Fremont Avenue apartment. He was holding 2 duffel bags and asked the witness to purchase an e-bike. The two boarded a bus, traveled to the witness's house, where Belter asked to purchase his Buick sedan, which was later abandoned, as you know, miles away from Belter's house in Green Isle. Belter and the man went to a U.S. Bank branch in Robbinsdale, where Belter withdrew $2,200 and emptied an account in his name. The complaint says he gave the man about $900 for the e-bike and the Buick. That I knew nothing about that until today. Were we aware of that and I just missed it? Or those are interesting details of filling in some of the gap in terms of the time of where we're trying to figure out where he was on Saturday.
Yeah, in fact, as I go into my story reporting tonight on the news, I am highlighting several of these new nuggets that we just did not know, but fill in the timeline. Remember, I'm right outside the Hortman home on the golf course. There's a massive manhunt underway. There's that lockdown shelter in place order up in Brooklyn Park around the Edinburgh golf course. Authorities think in those hours after he flees the Hortman house that he's in that area, right? That shelter in place order lasted for hours, but now we know he's kind of long gone. He's in Minneapolis at a bus stop meeting somebody he's never met before. And this idea that they get on a bus together, and he's got these duffel bags. He eventually goes to the U.S. Bank and gets out all of his money, and buys the Buick. So it wasn't a Buick that was previously owned by him that he picked it up. And again, there's an opportunity, Dan, as you talk about, someone's mindset, like, let me get the heck out of here, get away. I know, the heat's on me, but he chooses to go back to Sibley County. Hard to put it all together, but when you read that federal complaint, you think about all the investigative techniques and tactics, and then, whether, it's pinging cell phones or how they picked off of all of this and found that witness to connect to the Buick. It is pretty remarkable, and would explain why by the end of the weekend they had the guy in custody. So
do we know anything more about this witness, whether he had any idea? I assume had no idea what he was dealing with, but I'm just trying to figure out, what are the odds that he's going to run into somebody who says, you can buy my Buick for $2,200 or whatever? It seems like it's obviously incidental, but it just sounds so strange, so random.
Yep, and obviously in that criminal complaint, they don't identify the guy, so I certainly haven't had any personal contact. Doesn't explain how they met. Was it, they said they met up at a bus stop and they had never met each other, so it did sound like the way I read the complaint was the e-bike was sort of the first thing Belter had asked about. And then they went to the house and he saw the Buick, and then he asked, can I have the Buick too? And the guy or the person sold him both for the $900. They went to the bank together. They drained the bank account in Robbinsdale, and off goes Belter. You do wonder, perhaps one scenario might be, a witness would eventually recognize, when the suspect's photos, and he may have, reached out to law enforcement, or maybe perhaps once the Buick was abandoned and authorities ran the registration on that, and they're like, it belongs to this guy in North Minneapolis. Let's go see what that's all about. And then that story would have come out. But there's just not enough, there's not enough detail filling out that little nugget. But again, as prosecutors needing to connect all the dots, they certainly do it, but don't necessarily give us all the context. And it was not elaborated on at this morning's news conference, unfortunately.
Last item for you today. I know you're extremely busy. I appreciate the time as always. Give us a sense of what, just on a human level, the scene was like when you were around the Hortman home?
For a bit of it, right? Like I said, it was a shelter in place. It was, quiet. It was really hard to talk to people because they, were kind of locked down in their house. I was a little reluctant to go up to people and spook them in the context of, we didn't know where the gunman was. But eventually, I mean, the weight, the heft, you could tell it has taken a toll on that neighborhood. There's this element of, to us, Melissa Hortman's a speaker, this, groundbreaking, politician and a familiar face on the news. But, to neighbors, she's, Melissa the dog walker, Melissa, the sports mom from years ago that, our kids played sports together, and it was devastating, and the nature of it. It's a neighborhood that, a couple times over the last few years, there had been protests out in front of the Hortman house and that kind of thing, so that they were they certainly knew who she was. But to them, she was a dear friend, dear neighbor. Been in that neighborhood outside of Edinburgh Golf Course for years, and it was just crushing. It was scary. There was a lot of anxiety. You could feel that sense of relief, though, once sort of the shelter-in-place order was lifted. Yeah. I didn't go back the next day, but that was a heavy experience, and I did feel the emotions there.
Until the complaint was revealed today, had you gotten any inside word or any sort of even speculation about the possibility that the alleged perpetrator had made during the course of this nightmarish evening 2 other stops at the homes of 2 other state legislators?
We were starting to get that word that others had maybe. I didn't necessarily have it locked down. I think perhaps my colleague Karen Scullin had mentioned we thought there was maybe a stop in Maple Grove. The New Hope incident was interesting. Yeah. And I really think, Dan, I mean, I just kind of like to bring attention to a couple things in this case that I think, will be discussed for a long time to come. We did learn today that the Belter allegedly went to 4 homes of lawmakers. He started at Senator Hoffman's in Champlin and went up to Maple Grove and then New Hope, and then obviously the tragedy that unfolded at the Hortman house in Brooklyn Park. We had focused a lot of our attention on police sort of intercepting him at the Hortman house. We would learn today that just how close they had come to maybe saving the Hortmans, that police were kind of arriving just as Belter was allegedly on the front stoop and would fire his way in, basically killing the couple and the dog, and then taking off on foot, and how important it was to separate Belter from his vehicle and his arsenal at that point. But I do think there will be questions asked about what happened in New Hope. I don't have enough context for it. Perhaps you kind of process this as well. A police officer in New Hope did encounter Belter, again, under the same guise that, okay, there's been the shooting at Senator Hoffman's house. Let's do a preemptive, check on the homes of all the kind of lawmakers in that Northwest, metro pocket. And then the criminal complaint reads that the cop sort of makes eye contact or almost tries to engage with what she thought was a police type vehicle, and somebody in the car that she perceived was law enforcement, and that he's staring ahead and doesn't say anything. And, as that kind of scene plays out, he would eventually drive off, and then that officer would go and just check the home of the lawmaker. I'm really curious about what that looked like.
I agree.
Not blaming a cop at this point, but if you're suspicious and you're doing this check and there's this, random police squad looking vehicle and there's someone staring but not talking, and just seems a little weird to me, what really happened in that moment. And I don't want to second guess. I don't know the officer. I don't know how she was briefed. I don't know what she knew at that time, or, how she perceived what she saw, but I am curious to hear more about that.
Here's what I think, and I actually brought this up with former St. Cloud Police Chief Blair Anderson, because I'm with you. This is a very compelling part of this story, and I'm like you. I'm not in the position to question law enforcement in real time. However, the questions that are being asked are legitimate questions to ask, right? To flesh this story out. I agree 100%. I think there's a lot more that needs to be known there. And by the way, for the record, as I think you maybe know, State Senator Ann Rest DFLer from New Hope, did release a statement today that Belter had parked near her home. We're talking about the New Hope situation early on Saturday morning. She's got a long statement, thankful for the heroic work of the New Hope Police Department, its officers, quick action, saved my life, etc. But it is a fair question, because if your alarm bells are up at all, radar's up, and you think this is a law enforcement person, why would they not respond to you, right? So I think you're right. I think those are, look, we're all, it's a delicate balancing act, and we're all, because in so many ways, law enforcement was probably largely responsible for not more carnage, but that still doesn't mean that certain questions should not be asked and fleshed out, and I think this is clearly one that's going to have to be dealt with. Right. And it's New Hope. It's 3 a.m. Maybe you haven't gotten word that it was someone posing as fake law enforcement at the Hoffman House. I get that, but it just, again, but you are correct. I did see the quote from the lawmaker. She was clear that she felt they saved her life. Clearly just having the presence of that officer deterred what may have been, an attack on her home. That Belter, if that's who was in fact in the car, that he would take off and move on. But of course, where he moved on to was Brooklyn Park and the home of Speaker Hortman. This is not something I think you're covering right now, but you've been around a long time. You're a seasoned reporter, and you've dealt with a lot of elected officials. And, what always happens at a time like this is we got to rethink security across the board. We got to amp things up. We got a lot of vulnerability. And as much as I understand that logic, and as much as I think certainly everything should be looked at a time like this, and I know that there's not enough security to go around really to be 24/7 in position to necessarily prevent this sort of thing. What's the balancing act there? What's fair? Or do you think there is going to be a need, at the State House, for example, other places involving legislators in this state to take a fresh look at, what rational security measures can be taken? Yeah, I think it absolutely has to happen. The Capitol remains a wide open building, without metal detectors, without weapons screening. I would think this absolutely changes that. I don't know. I did see the security committee from the legislature that kind of runs security on the Capitol grounds. It put out a statement. I didn't read it, but I do know obviously that they had something to say today. But no, what do you do? I would think the Hoffmans, they clearly had some type of Ring camera. It's not many people have it, but they probably thought they had sort of security that might make them comfortable, and then obviously. You answer the door, you think there's a cop. There are people who just do horrific things, who scheme up nightmarish scenarios, and then how do you protect the middle of the night? Hey, we heard, police, you heard there's a shooting. Which is what's alleged, that Belter, rang the doorbell as a police, pretending to be police, that he's heard there's been a shooting inside the house. Is everyone okay? And, again, through the criminal complaint that they would quickly realize he's not a cop. And then as, they try to shut him out, he opens fire, and, they're critically injured. So I do think that this changes the dynamic of security, certainly in the public forum. But an assassination at someone's home in the dead of night by someone pretending to be police, obviously Hortman might be a little bit more higher profile that might have, if we move forward with more intense security, might have somebody at the house, but you can't protect like backbench lawmakers or every person who holds a, elected job. And Dan, I don't mean to turn it on us at all, but, it made me uneasy this week. And I'm somebody, who puts, I'm not an elected official. Don't get me wrong. I know that's the attention that we'll get, but, someone who's out there publicly that kind of inflames, a story or two. Like it made me rethink a lot of things as I covered this weekend. And yeah, what do you do, especially someone that clearly is bent on creating terror and havoc and carrying out just an awful actions. Well, as I mentioned much earlier in the show, to your point, Paul, this is a guy who texted to his wife, "Dad went to war last night." When you're dealing with somebody who is in that mode, right, there are limits to how much you can do to protect individuals from it. That's someone who was utterly and completely committed to assassination over the weekend.
Right. Right, and had that massive arsenal.
Yes.
And again, I know I harped on that, what happened in New Hope, but, so much more could have continued to unfold, if not, for him getting separated from all those guns he had. All
right, so your regular reports, I assume, tonight on Fox, pretty much, I assume, all night long, correct?
Yeah, I'll be, 5, 6, 7. I think they're going to give me, the later evening off to regroup. But, gotcha. And we'll be taking, like I said, a closer look at some of those little nuggets that you clearly have also hit on, just the awesome. New developments that we didn't quite have locked down to the weekend.
Thanks for the extended time, my friend. We appreciate it as always, and we'll be in touch as the story plays out. Thanks, Paul.
I appreciate that, Dan. Take care.
Paul Blume, Fox 9. Right here on the Fan. Johnny Athletic is scheduled to join us in studio in the 5 o'clock hour. I'm sure even during that hour, we will continue to explore the A-section topic. We may be adding another guest before this program is done. We've got plans for guests pretty much the rest of the week to try to continue to cover this story. Don't go away.
Ow.
Now, a lot has been said about law enforcement in recent weeks, but make no mistake, the men and women of our federal, state, and local law enforcement put their lives at risk and on the line to keep Minnesota safe. They work tirelessly, day and night, to make sure that the tragic events of Friday night ended without further violence or bloodshed. We owe them all a debt of gratitude, and they will forever have my respect and admiration.
That was acting U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, Joe Thompson, at the press conference this morning, in which the federal and state murder charges were officially unveiled. And as it turns out, Joe is scheduled to join us at the top of the 5 o'clock hour today, so we'll have a chance to go over some of what he got into today. And one of the things I want to talk about with him, actually, is, he has already, this is a man who ended up being, especially once Andy Luger resigned, front and center in the Feeding Our Future scandal, right? Those have largely lately been his cases, huge cases. Now, these obviously are on a different level because they involve literally life and death. But he is again front and center, right? Involved in a significant investigation as well that has clearly local and regional implications, but in this case, federal implications as well, given the fact that these are now federal and state charges. And I think we'll double check this with him that he had indicated at the presser today that the federal process will go first. That doesn't mean the state charges that they go away, but that the federal side of this will take prominence as well. So we may get more detail on that later from him. Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line is open at 64686. There was this was one of those weekends, obviously, where this is obviously not as important as the main part of the story, which is largely what we've covered since the start of the show and will continue to cover with Joe Thompson at 5. By the way, Johnny Athletic is coming in studio. He was originally scheduled for 5, so he'll probably come on after Joe, but he is coming in for, we hope, a solid hour of discussion that might include a little bit about this. And the only significant toy department respite probably through today's program. And now I kind of lost my train of thought here. The implications here, I think, from one would assume from a federal standpoint, is the charges automatically become more serious. You've got greater weight and gravitas of the feds, as we've learned with lots of cases, right, in the state of Minnesota the last few years. Many of those led by Andy Luger and now Thompson, that it takes on a whole new dimension, one could say, at that level as well. So we will still try to, and we got a couple of other guests that we're looking at to try to fill in gaps if at all possible. And, it's an active, what they call in the business, right, an active investigation, which means they can add charges, they can add details, they can add nuggets. They're going, as it was, I think there was a pretty good overview. I think the complaint right now, I believe, is 22 pages, if I'm not mistaken. That certainly gave us a lot more detail than we had been aware of before, correct?
A ton. I had to rewind it when the acting attorney went to 4 lawmakers' houses. Said, is he just totaling the 4 people?
Right.
Obviously, the victims here that were either shot or killed. And then he starts going through it, and you go, oh, my God. I mean, it's even more chilling when you think about all the stuff that could have happened that did not.
Well, and clearly, you're not like the night before, say, I'm going to check a couple of addresses, right? This is part of what they lay out in the complaint, that significant planning took place here. Coordination. Well, I say coordination with himself, but with people's, maybe not people's schedules, but where they lived. A lot of those details were part of the press conference today. So Belter is charged with 6 federal crimes, including stalking and murder for the killing of Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband, Mark, and the shooting of Senator John Hoffman and his wife, Yvette. And those charges, according to Joe Thompson, the acting U.S. attorney, carry the potential for a death sentence as well. And that's another part. There's another part of the human story here that I think as time goes on and there's availability is going to get a lot more attention and prominence. And that is how it is possible that John Hoffman and his wife are alive.
Right.
And surviving. Now, as I understand it, Senator Hoffman has already had a number of surgeries, but I believe both individuals are viewed as they're going to survive this. But the number of, I've read various reports. I don't know how specific today Thompson got with the number of a number of times that they were shot. But first it was 5 to 6 each. Then I thought it was even more than that in the case of Senator Hoffman.
I believe his wife told Amy Klobuchar the numbers, right? It was 8 and 9 respectively. Yeah.
And I believe one of those shots, very close to his heart, but obviously far enough away that he's able to survive. That story in of itself, that level of, given you think, for all the obvious reasons, the disadvantage that you're at, this guy's got all kinds of hardware, and he's obviously not afraid to use it, and that you survive. Now, again, as you know, we talked about earlier with the chief, the mental scars for the survivors of the Hortman assassination, the children, and then for everybody involved at the other house, even though, thankfully they were able to survive at least, is incalculable, right? You can't even begin to appreciate what might be involved there as well. And the other thing, and I don't know how much he's going to be willing to get into this with us, Thompson mentioned at the presser today just how haunting the video is at the Hoffman home. As it dawns upon them,
right?
You're not a police,
which
right?
They say,
which they actually apparently say. It's traumatic indeed. As I said, we'll mix in. Well, here's a quick text I want to get to. And maybe we can explore it in a little more detail after we get caught up on the breaks. Dan, you mentioned the performance aspect of politics. I agree with the assessment. One of the problems with exactly that aspect of politics, which you correctly characterize as increasing, is that it can incite people who are not completely stable. So even if Mr. Belter is not found to be incompetent for the purposes of criminal proceedings, it would be difficult to change my opinion that he has some serious mental health issues. Exactly this type of person who can be influenced by political performance, which in turn can have tragic results. There are too many recent examples in our history to list that demonstrate that point. That's from Bernie in Lionel Lakes. And here's where it gets very tricky, because I don't disagree with that. And I don't know what exactly the line is. I will say, for me, the line is easy regarding the U.S. Senator. Is he from Utah?
Yes.
That we quoted earlier? Is it Lee?
Mike Lee.
To me, that line is clear as day. you've disqualified yourself from being taken seriously on anything for however long you're going to be in office. You know, I'm not calling for your resignation. Nobody would care. But you're done to me in that regard, in that point. But it's a tricky line because on the basis of, well, you never know what might trigger somebody, you can't blunt all political debate and discourse, right? Because that's sadly how some people try to get legitimate political debate blunted. They go, well, be careful saying that because you never know who's going to overreact. So wait a minute now. If on the basis of concern about how people are going to react, you try to, I guess, eliminate any kind of sharp rhetoric, then we're letting the terrorists win on another level. So it becomes a double-end game that has been used in the past. Better shut up. You talk like that, you never know what the guy down the street who's living in the basement in his boxers is going to do. And I get it to a degree, but it can't be used as a weapon to quote-unquote shut people up. So we're back to different people are going to come to different conclusions about, well, this is far enough in terms of being biting and tough, and this is too far, right? That's another whole battle, another debate, and I don't think we're going to agree on that either.
Probably not. Before we pause, if there's not enough going on today, It's been a weird weather day kind of all over the state, as we know.
Yeah.
It's clear here for the moment. But we should let people know that a tornado warning has been issued for Crow Wing, Aitkin, Cass County, I should say, until about 5:30. Looking at like Brainerd Lakes area, Cross Lake area, just a little bit, obviously northwest of us here. So if you know people there, just make sure they're doing what they need to be doing. But a tornado warning up north, so to speak, that we'll be watching.
Fair enough. We'll keep an eye on that as well. Let's get caught up and get back in just a minute. And don't forget, as I said, at the planned right now, at least for the top of the hour, is the acting U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, Joe Thompson, who revealed the chilling sequence of events as they laid it out earlier today, federally speaking, at a press conference. Stay tuned. That's a heavy text day, as one might expect. 612 guy responding to our last texter writes, blaming this on political polarizations, missing the target. He didn't murder two people because a politician called the president a mean name. He did it because he's an anti-abortion lunatic, the same type that we've seen attack clinics and doctors for years. May well be that that's ultimately the case. I'm willing to wait a minute and a half before we reach that sweeping conclusion. Often the truth regarding individuals capable of this kind of behavior is complicated, and a lot of factors end up being involved. The reason the political polarization topic is part of this conversation is that becomes part of the game, as I said earlier, that's played. And often when somebody on your side of the aisle gets harmed in some way, you want to draw a straight line from quote-unquote dangerous rhetoric to triggering the individual responsible, whether there is a straight line or not. Sometimes there might be. Sometimes it might be a little, might go sideways a little bit. But as I said earlier, if it's on the other side of the aisle and somebody's trying to use that against your guy, it's, oh, come on, be careful. Be careful drawing those grand conclusions about, well, this is what set that individual off. We may come to find out that something specific did set this individual off, a piece of rhetoric. We don't know yet, quite frankly. And it's part of what we'll try to get into with our guest at the top of the hour, the acting U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, Joe Thompson, who is, of course, front and center on this case now. But he's probably right. And that's where it gets funky about how we try to link those sorts of things. And we tend to prefer linking them when we think they represent a point of view that we don't like. If we were consistent with that, then I would respect it more. But that's what we've certainly talked about that for years and years and years. And that doesn't mean in all situations both sides are equally guilty. It depends on the situation. But that's, I think, what we're kind of fighting. And look, the first indication I had from people that I trusted was this had more to do with being anti-abortion than anything else. That was at the top of the list. But those were from individuals who said, we don't know yet, but that's where this might be going. That's how this seems to be looking. So is that got anything to do? Is there any amount of lowering the temperature on rhetoric that might have been different? I don't know. But on the other hand, if you are in the business of being in the anti-abortion culture, is it also possible that something you read, a particular comment, set you off even more than you had been before? Yeah, it's the great unknown. And like I said, if we can wait 15 minutes, we might get some of those answers, even though likely, ultimately, you're going to decide on your own whether to accept whatever those grand conclusions might be. That's, I think, part of what we're battling here as well. As I mentioned earlier, Johnny Athletic, first time in studio forever, and who knew it would be under these conditions. So the plan is we are going to talk some toy department stuff with Johnny later in the 5. We may discuss some of this subject with him as well, because Johnny's a pretty good thinker and does think beyond the toy department, like some of us at least try to do from time to time. So that'll be the plan later in the 5 o'clock hour, after we expect a top of the hour visit, as I mentioned, with U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson. He is coming up. He was, of course, front and center earlier today and is scheduled to join us next.